Hi, my name is Megan Rice. I'm the music teacher at Yosemite High School in Oakhurst. I went to Sonoma State University and I got the K-12 single subject credential in music. Right now I'm teaching a middle school band and then high school concert band, wind ensemble, percussion ensemble, marching band, jazz band, and choir. I'm in my second year of teaching. Both years have been at Yosemite High School. I'm originally from Santa Rosa, California, just about an hour north of San Francisco. And I student taught in Sonoma County in Petaluma at Casa Grande High School, where I worked with their 3 concert bands and 2 jazz bands. At Sonoma State University, I studied instrumental music education, and my main instrument is the saxophone. At Yosemite High School, we've got about 650 students, and the high school music population is approximately 75 students, so a little under 12% of the school. I'm in my second year of induction, and for this year I chose standards 3 and 4, so understanding and organizing subject matter for student learning, and planning instruction and designing learning experiences for all students. So in the fall, I had knowledge on the subject matter, of course, from college and my first year of teaching, but I still had a lot more to learn. And I thought that the more I knew, the more knowledge I had in music, and the better strategies I had to communicate it with the students, then the better musicians they would be. And now at the end of this year, I have a lot more knowledge to share with my students than I did before. I also had goals about like the music theory that I wanted my students to learn, but I hadn't really communicated it with them. And I didn't know what direction we were going to go in really. But now my students and I both have a much clearer understanding of both the long-term and short-term goals for music theory. All right, so for my individual learning plan, my first goal is related to that 3rd standard, specifically the element 3.1, demonstrating knowledge of subject matter, academic content standards, and curriculum frameworks. So my goal here was specifically to enhance my knowledge of subject matter and content standards to facilitate student understanding. And the way I wanted to reach that and to measure it in my students' work was through their playing. I focused on my wind ensemble, which is my higher performing wind band on campus. So I wanted them to score well on their playing tests, where I listened to individual students play for me and show their progress as we learn a piece. I wanted them to get 80% or higher on those playing tests by the end of the semester. And then as an ensemble, I evaluated them on their performances. And by the end of the semester, I wanted them to get 90% or better on those performance evaluations. Some of the pathways for me to get there would be going to the CASMEC All-State Music Education Conference back in February. I also have taken students to be critiqued by college professors. I volunteered to be a judge for the Fresno-Madera County Honor Band this year. I judged the saxophone auditions, but then I also observed the rehearsals of the high school honor band, and they had a fantastic director that I got to watch. I also observed another band director, went to several concerts, and I regularly read through posts on a Facebook group for band directors. And one of my favorite things that I got for my students out of one of these is when I watched the honor band director, he used this strategy when he was warming them up that it just like hones in their focus right away while practicing a scale, while practicing articulation. It like throws 3 things together in one in a way that I hadn't seen before. So I definitely stole that from him. So to prepare them for those playing tests and evaluations, I made a playing test rubric and explained it to the students. I had student volunteers model like what a playing test would look like, so it wasn't so intimidating. And then as an ensemble, I taught them all the scales, the music, and everything that would be tested in those playing tests. For the ensemble reviews, I showed them the ensemble performance rubric, and we would record ourselves during class and use the rubric to see, like, if this was a performance, what kind of a score would we have gotten, to practice before the actual performance. And so again, I was hoping for the students to get 80% or higher on those playing tests by the end, and to get 90% or higher on the ensemble evaluations. So the way we arrived there was through 3 playing tests, one at the beginning, middle, and end of learning a particular piece. And then we also did 3 evaluations of our performances for our fall concert, winter concert, and our performance in the spring. And I chose 3 focus students to look at to see if what we were doing was working. Student A was like my gifted and advanced student, and he is also struggling with managing his ADHD. Student B was like an average student. They do well, but they are missing some things. And then student C is significantly struggling both in their playing and in the music theory area. I did not select an English language learner because I do not have one in that class. So this is an example of my rubric for the playing test. Basically, you can score 3, 2, or 1 in 5 categories. So I was listening to their tone, notes and rhythms, articulation, technique, and musicality. So try to get a little bit of everything in there. And we went over what would receive the highest score, what kind of playing would get the highest score, and then what would it sound like if you were kind of getting some of those lower scores. And so on the score sheet, the most they could get would be 15 out of 15, and then I would give them comments. I would give them comments in person, but also written on the score sheet. So this is an example of student C. So he was kind of struggling, and so he received some low scores, and I gave him a lot of feedback. I gave him some feedback in each area. We talked about it. And so this was the first test. By the time we got to the third test, he scored 71%. So he was able to raise those scores a little bit. Student B started around a 67, and then their scores raised up to an 80% by the end. And then student A also started at 67%, and then he just kind of skyrocketed at the end. And so I have a little sound bite of where he started on just one chunk of the piece and then where he ended up. So here's the first playing test he did for me. All right, so not bad. He kind of played it right, but he was not the best tone quality, and he missed several notes in there and some rhythms too. And then by the third test, he was doing much better. So just like way more accurate on the notes, better tone quality, and then like much more expression, especially the decrescendo at the end there. So that's just an example of like what I was hearing. And then as a class, we went from a 63% average to an 85% average by the third test. And for the ensemble evaluations, I stole the rubric straight from CMEA, went straight to the top. This is what they would use if we went to like a state competition. And there's a lot of information, obviously, but the main point here is we would be classification 2 in the middle. It's based on group size and school size and stuff. So in order to receive the highest rating, we have to get mostly in this 4th column and then some in the 5th column. So looking more closely at that, the 5th column gives detailed instructions on exactly how the students need to play in order to receive those highest scores. And it's looking at similar things to my playing tests: their tone, technique, musicality, things like that. So we went over what would our best sound be. So in the fall, they scored basically mostly in columns 3 and 4, nothing in that 5th column yet. And they got a 10 out of 15, which would be considered an excellent rating. By the time we got to spring, they were playing music that was mostly, the way they were playing sounded like the 4th and 5th columns here. They had improved in several areas. And so they got a 14 out of 15 rating, which would be called a superior rating. So overall, we went from what would be considered like a 67%, an excellent rating, all the way up to what would be a 93%, that superior rating by the spring. So in general, the results were that the class average on playing test was 85% by the 3rd test. And so we met that goal of getting higher than 80%. And then for the ensemble evaluations, they got a 93% by the end, which met our goal of scoring 90% or better by that spring performance. For my second ILP goal, which was focused on that 4th standard, specifically I looked at element 4.3, developing and sequencing long-term and short-term instructional plans to support student learning. And so this is where I focused on music theory specifically. My goal was to develop and apply long and short-term curricular goals to support student learning of the subject matter. So I did quizzes, theory quizzes, and then a final theory test. I wanted them to get 70% or higher on those quizzes by the end, and 80% or higher on that final test. The pathways included, again, that conference I went to in February, observing other directors, talking with my colleagues. I have friends who have been doing this a lot longer and they help me out a lot. And then again, reading through posts on that band director Facebook group. So to prepare for this, I made a list of all the concepts that I wanted to get through in 1 year, and then I put them in order. So before I even taught them any theory, I wanted to know what order I was going to go in and what the end goal was. I taught the concepts gradually over the weeks. I didn't do like a whole day of theory. I would do a little bit at a time. I encouraged the students to share how they got to their conclusions, because like teaching music theory is a lot like teaching math. And the way that I understand the concept is not going to be the same as at least a third of the class. So specifically like student A has like a very technical mind. So I would often ask him to explain how he got to his conclusion, because I know it would reach other students better than just the way I came to that conclusion. I also wanted to present concepts in a variety of ways. I gave a practice quiz before it kind of like counted towards their grade. And then I would give them feedback, extra instruction, offer help at lunch, after school, in between those quizzes. And I wouldn't move on until I felt like at least most of the class had kind of grasped all of the concepts. So I gave quizzes, and then finally at the end gave that final test. Again, we're looking at 70% or higher on the quizzes and 80% or higher on that test. I ended up giving 5 quizzes before that final test, and again, looked at those 3 focus students from before. So student C started with a significantly low score at only 20%, but then was able to raise their scores up to 67 with a lot of studying. Student B started around 40% and then steadily rose, struggled a little bit on that 5th test, but still ended at 73%. And then student A kind of like had it all along, but went from B average up to 100% on those last 2 quizzes. As a class, we went from a class average of 49% up to 84 and then 80% at the end there. On that final test, student A got a 98%, did a great job. Student B got a 90, really knocked it out of the park. Student C, a 75. And then the class average on that test was 87%. So I was really, really proud of them. The results for the theory curriculum was that over time, we rose from 49% to 80% and ended up beating our goal of getting 70% or higher. And the class average on the test was 87%, which beat the goal of getting 80% or higher. So I grew over this year for sure. Looking at this continuum of teaching practice, we had to do it at the beginning of induction, again at the end of year one, and then one more time now. Looking at the elements that I focused on for this, 3.1, I feel like I went from exploring to applying. I have a much better understanding of how I need to apply my knowledge in the classroom, and I just have a lot more to pull from. And I'm going to just continue to learn more every year. And then for 4.3, long-term and short-term instructional plans, I feel so much more comfortable with my curricular goals, especially for music theory. So I went from applying to integrating in that area. For my next steps, I had some plans for the summer that unfortunately won't be happening. I was planning on going to an instrumental conducting workshop at Sonoma State in June, but I'll do that next year. And then the ACDA ECHO Conference happens annually up in Oakhurst. It's one of the biggest choral conferences in the state, and it's just right up here in Oakhurst. It's really cool. Unfortunately, also won't be able to do that until next year. Also next year, I will potentially be adjusting to teaching with social distancing or more online instruction, but I will do my best on that. Regardless of what happens next year, I want to work on improving recruitment and retention. I want to focus on getting more middle schoolers involved, helping my feeder program, and just really strengthening my high school program. I definitely want to show that I'm an essential part of campus and that I'm doing something good for the kids, and the more the merrier. I want to continue attending conferences and professional development as much as possible, take my ensembles to festivals or to other adjudicated events if possible. If I'm not able to travel, I still want to try to maybe bring in college clinicians that can listen to us in the classroom and give us some feedback there. Long term, my 5-year plan includes getting a master's in music education. I'm looking at doing a 3 summer program so I can do it while I'm still teaching, possibly through Michigan State. And I'm just really happy to be here in Oakhurst, here at Yosemite High School. I plan on staying here for at least a few more years while I work on my master's degree. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.